Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a real privilege to be here actually, and I've just been shown around, and I just want to say how impressed I am at the work that's happening here, because it's very seldom that you see, actual activism, I like to call it, which is physically helping people. There's a lot of stuff that's happening all over the country at the moment, and I'm on board with a lot of it. A lot of the activism is absolutely necessary. But there isn't enough community. That's what we need as a nation, is we need to get back to community. So anyway, I think the work here is fantastic, and I hope to be able to support this place in the future. I am the leader of the Christian Nationalist Party. And so for those of you, I'm going to talk to you about two things today, if I may, if you'll allow me. The first is Christian nationalism, but don't worry, there won't be any Bible bashing, although I am partial to it, but I'll save it for another day. And the second thing I want to talk about is local politics and why it's necessary. But for those of you who don't know me, let me just allow myself, if you may, to just introduce who I am and give you a bit of my background. So I hate politics. I know I shouldn't say it because I'm at a political conference, but I have to say, politics for me, mainstream politics, national politics, it's so corrupt, isn't it? If we could take the money out of politics, we would see who actually loves this country. Yeah. We would see. The only people left would be true nationalists, patriots, Christians, decent folk. My journey into politics was actually through activism. I grew up in southeast London. I worked in London when the 7/7 bombs went off. And at the time, other than 9/11, we hadn't really heard about terrorist attacks, certainly not on our soil. And so I remember driving to work, not wanting to drive too close to a bus that was in front of me for weeks after the attack, thinking that it might happen again. And it triggered my interest in what was motivating the culprits. And then tragically, a few years later, Lee Rigby was murdered on the streets of our capital, just down the road from where I lived and worked. And at the time I was working in a law firm, studying law, had full intentions of, high-flying legal career, which I'm banned from now, obviously. And I decided that I had to get involved in some sort of struggle for justice, or at least to ascertain why this was happening. So I got involved in local activism, and I went to a couple of rallies for certain groups that I didn't find were heading in the right direction. I went to a couple of EDL rallies, and there was no form of leadership, and I could see it wasn't very structured. And then I found my way to a group called Britain First, which many of you will have met me through. And there's lots of familiar faces, some I haven't seen for 8 years, which is lovely to catch up with. And I rose to a position of leadership in Britain First, and committed my time to constant activism. I shut down my business. I ploughed everything I had, money, time, everything, into the organisation. And I have to say, I'm going to say this now, just to get this out of the way. As activists, many of you are, we evolve in our activism. I certainly have anyway, because we mature. So I entered political activism when I was in my 20s, and I was probably a bit green to the real threat, the real agenda that was pushing a lot of the problems that we have in the UK, mass immigration, multiculturalism, indoctrination, Islamification. I was maybe a bit green as to what the real agenda was behind all of that. I just saw the face of it was that, Islam's in the UK. I will say this, in this day and age, in 2025, given what is happening in the Middle East, in the Holy Land, no less, and with the information that we have readily available to us, I find it remarkable to the point of, unbelievable that anyone can't identify the true threat and motivation behind what is going on in our country. And I believe the greatest threat to our nation and all Western nations, and in fact, worldwide, to be Zionism. This video is probably going to come down now, so I'll say goodbye to those of you who are watching. But I need to lay that out, because it's very important that as mature activists, we can identify the threats so that we don't waste our time and money and efforts pursuing something that is actually a byproduct. It's not that we need to ignore it. It's not that I haven't changed my mind from when I used to charge through the streets with a cross and talk about Muhammad and all the rest of it. None of that has changed. I still hold the same values, but we have to identify the driving force. And you know, the world is really changing, and that driving force has been identified. And so I'm not going to go into this because many of you will have seen, it was quite publicly covered, the reasons for my exit from Britain First, which I won't go into, not least because there are legal proceedings still ongoing. But I came straight out of jail and left that organisation, and I refused to allow the establishment to pull me away from what I had dedicated all of my time and effort and money and everything to. And so I really just went out as a kind of lone voice, back on my soapbox that I'd been on maybe 10 years before. I started on my soapbox. I'm in my second decade of activism now. I know you can't believe it because I'm only 21, but I started young. And so I was back on my soapbox doing my thing, and then COVID happened. And so as a reaction, pure reaction to COVID, I decided to use the skills that I had acquired through practicing law to help people. And so I launched then the British Freedom Movement, which was in direct response to the COVID restrictions and the draconian rules and regulations that they were trying to push as legislation and law. People were being unlawfully fined, they were being rounded up, and so I said, I don't care, actually, whether you are left wing, right wing, chicken wing, I don't care. I don't care where you're from, if you're in this country and you're being unlawfully hounded by the establishment and fined and imprisoned, I will represent you free of charge, and we'll fight, because we have to fight, because this is bigger than a virus and a cold and masks and all that nonsense. And so it started out as an advocacy service, and we launched various campaigns. And, you know, some of these campaigns now, they seem like a distant memory, but one of them was we gave out thousands of these exempt cards so that people could wear them around their neck and say, I don't have to wear a mask, right? Because the government had given a loophole to get out of wearing masks, but people felt they needed something. Not everyone's as argumentative as I am, and they didn't all want to go into shops and say, I'm not wearing a mask. They wanted something around their neck that got them off. So we said, we'll give you one. This was a government issued image. I bet they regretted that. We gave thousands of these away for free. People all over the country were wearing them to say, we're not complying. We're not wearing this mask. So this was just one way in which we fought back against the system. And then we morphed into a political party. And we started contesting elections. And I remember bumping into John Lawrence in Batley and Spen. I stood in Batley purely because a few years before, Joe Cox had been murdered there, the incumbent MP at the time, and I got blamed for it, which is not unusual. I get blamed for lots of things. And so I thought, well, how can I upset the establishment more than standing in the very seat for which I was blamed for a member of Parliament's death had absolutely nothing to do with me. In fact, it was one of these occasions where the guy had mental health issues and he'd gone and asked for help. But of course, blaming the right wing is a better narrative than saying the NHS has let down a British man who has come for help. So they pinpointed that on me. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll stand and I'll run a hardline campaign telling people that really voting for me is futile, but I'd like to upset the left. And so I produced a leaflet that was pushing Christianity and white nationalism, because, you know, this is Britain. We are a white European nation. We are Christian. And, you know, there was just some bits about LGBT being kicked out of schools and hanging grooming gangs, you know, your average, you know, just very run-of-the-mill political message. And but we realised, actually, you know, when COVID struck, we realised that this whole system is just, it's rigged, this political system. On this level, and you're going back, what, 5 years now? So during COVID, we decided we were going to stand in these campaigns, but what we would do is we would tell people to spoil the ballot and boycott the campaign entirely, boycott the election. And so one of the most probably controversial seats that we did this in was in Southend West. And in Southend West, you're probably aware, the incumbent Member of Parliament at the time was David Amis, who was part of a refugees welcome campaign and was murdered in his surgery by a immigrant into the country. And so it was probably thought of as very crass to stand in that seat. And a lot of the political parties said, we're not going to stand, because it's only right and proper that, you know, his successor of that party takes this seat. I said, I'm going to stand, but I don't want you to vote for me. I don't want you to vote for anyone. I want you to spoil the ballot paper, and I want you to write on the ballot paper why you're spoiling it. And I want you to tell them to give our freedom back. Because this was at the time when the Tories and Labour were allowing people to die alone in hospital beds, and they were forcing us to wear masks, and the invasion of our shores was continuing by the small boats, and the legal immigration was continuing, and they were partying. They were having weekly shindigs in the Commons, whilst we were all told that we couldn't hug our grandmothers, and people were dying alone. Elderly, children, it was happening all over. So we took that approach, and we gave out other literature. We produced different campaigns, tangible ways to help people. Cancelling their TV licence, we're still running that campaign today. We found ways to help people, but by boycotting the system. Because at that stage, 5 years ago, we identified that politics really was not the answer. Now, I'm going to take you back about 15 years. I was ridiculed for saying what I believed was the future for this nation. There will still be people that disagree with me. I believe that we are headed towards civil unrest in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I actually believe that the lid is already off and it will not go back on. And I have been saying this for a long time, and 15 years ago they were jailing me for saying this. Now, experts, even the lefty rags like the Telegraph and the Guardian, are talking about the fact that this is so inevitable. It's unstoppable. The lid is off. They cannot contain what the establishment have caused. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of mitigating loss. So this brings us kind of to modern day. Modern day, I run the Christian Nationalist Party. We take a very different approach to the one that I took in Britain First, which was really agitation, activism, big demos. We're taking a different approach to the one we took as the British Freedom Party, which was one of boycott, resist, don't comply. Our message now and our ethos now is that we do believe that local politics has a very significant role to play. And that's why I was really pleased to be invited here today, because it's groups like yourselves, the National Housing Party UK, and other organic, non-foreign sponsored groups who are actually going to be vital in the situation that's occurring. Just last night, someone was attacked after putting flags up on the streets of the UK. Our own flags. They were attacked. They had petrol bombs thrown at them. Now, I live in Northern Ireland. I have done for a few years since I got out of jail. They took my house. I had a house in London. They took it. The first transsexual High Court judge in our United Kingdom took my house that I purchased when I practiced law before I ever got involved in activism, and they gifted it to the Halal Food Authority because I upset them by talking about the barbarism and where the money went. They sued the party that I was aligned with for £500,000, and Britain First very kindly said, we don't have the money, but take her house. And that's exactly what they did. So I came out of prison, no house, no car, credit cards had been used, absolutely full of debt, and thought, I like a challenge. And here we are. And so, now our ethos really, it is focusing on what we can do locally, right? Focusing on what we can do locally. And so we're involved with lots of different groups, and I'm privileged to be here today. What we see as an absolute necessity is actually what's going on the streets right now. I'm living in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, flags are everywhere. It's not a strange thing to see flags flying from every single house and every single lamppost, especially through the marching season. And so, even back with the British Freedom Party, we launched a campaign to get a flag on every home on the mainland. Because this isn't just some silly gimmick. Yeah, I see, strangely enough, because I've been outspoken against the Israeli genocide that's been inflicted on the people of Gaza, including our Christian brethren who are in Gaza, whom I don't want to live in my country, by the way, but I also don't want being blown to smithereens in their homeland. Because I've been outspoken against that, I've accrued a following of Muslims online, which is a very strange and disconcerting position for me to find myself in, to be honest. But there we are. The Lord works in mysterious ways. And so I'm doing my best to convert them all to Christianity, but that's my goal. And but I see that a lot of them are scoffing at what's happening at the moment. You know, you guys are putting your flags up. Do you think this is some kind of revolutionary act? Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what this is. Because the men and women of the United Kingdom for over 40 years have not reacted to the mass grooming and raping of our children. Something has snapped. Something has snapped in the British society and people have had enough. And I've been waiting for this. I don't want this, by the way. I don't want civil unrest and civil war because I didn't live through the troubles in Northern Ireland, but living in Northern Ireland now, I know what these people suffered without having experienced it myself. You know, I can tell you what these people suffered. Expect it on a far greater scale on the mainland UK. And this is where local politics comes in, because we're helping people right now with the campaign to put the flags up across the UK. A few days ago, we said we will give a free flag to anyone in the UK that wants one. Just pay the postage, I will mail it to you that day. We've been inundated. I haven't seen so many flags go out the door in my life. It's carnage. I've got nothing else done. All I'm doing is stuffing envelopes with flags. Everyone in the office is just flag stuffing. But the reason we're getting behind stuff like this is because it's actually one step closer to the British people regaining their identity and realising that raising that flag isn't a gimmick. This is carving out our boundaries. Okay, now, I went to jail for this. Might go back. I'm going to say it again. I shot a video in Belfast outside a peace wall. And I said, I submit, this was about 7-8 years ago, I submit that these peace walls will be separating the mainland UK. And I submit that the largest groups will be a minority. The whites will be a minority in the UK. This is happening. Demographics don't lie. But I submit that the two groups which will be at loggerheads the most will be the Islamic community and the indigenous Brits, because they will be the dominant minorities, if you like. And so these peace walls, those peace walls weren't put up before the conflict. That was post-conflict. That was after people had their limbs blown up. That was after children were being scraped off of the wall. That was after. There's bad times ahead of us. And I'm not here to just put the fear of the Lord into everybody, but this is what's coming. And look, if I'm wrong, let's see. But the fact that everybody now is openly speaking about this is something I think we need to prepare for. So where do you guys come in? And where does the National Housing Party UK come into something like this? Because you might think, oh, well, politics is all out the window then. Why would we even bother with politics if it's all just going to be bombs and civil unrest? Why would we bother? It will be groups like this that hold the country together. And this isn't a prediction. This has been done. We've seen this. In Northern Ireland, for example, during the Troubles, when there was civil conflict, it was the local groups, it was the civic men, the local councillor. All right, we've got the Orange Order in Northern Ireland. We don't have that structure on the mainland UK that's as strong. But we have men in roles, civic roles, whether they are local councillors, churchmen, men that have put themselves as forward as leaders in their community. These were the men that were negotiating on a local level about keeping that constituency's electricity on, about keeping that local constituency's refuse. This was all done locally, because central government will not be functioning if this all goes to pot. And I believe we are headed that way. And I think if we don't plan for that, we are being naive. And look, people say to me, well, where does this square up then with you being a Christian and a Christian nationalist? Because the most common question I get asked when I say I'm the leader of the Christian Nationalist Party, in fact, I'm the founder of the Christian Nationalist Party. Let me just correct, I'm too used to saying leader of everything else. I'm not the leader of the Christian Nationalist Party. I'm a woman. and I'm a Christian. And therefore I believe that the men of our respective nations are in charge. And so we have an eldership, a leadership team of men, theologians, ministers, veterans, and they lead our movement. And they are based from America, Europe, UK, all over. We have people all over, men all over, men who are used to combat, men who are actively involved in high octane campaigns. And so people ask, well, how do you guys square this up, this nationalist thing? Because, you know, Christians, you're all together. It's all one big, it's not nationalist, is it? Let me tell you something. It absolutely is. And I was pleased to see that Pat McGuinness put a video out saying this just a few days ago. The Bible's very clear about nation states. In fact, I'm not going to Bible bash. I'm just going to say, if you read the book of Acts and go to chapter 17, verse 26, it clearly states that God created respective nations for respective peoples, and he set out the boundaries for those people. We are not a globalist utopia. In fact, in the Bible, there was an attempt at a globalist utopia, and God struck it down at the Tower of Babel. We have seen countless examples in the Bible of people going on economic migrant trails and even being turned into pillars of salt for their troubles. So never let anybody tell you that reinstalling Christian values means that you have to open your borders, that you have to house people who aren't from here first, because that's the Christian thing to do, loving thy neighbour. Thy neighbour, neighbouring countries, neighbouring nations. We don't all live together. You know, so this is probably the most common question that we get asked in the Christian Nationalist Party is, well, how does this work? Because realistically, we're in an ethno battle. And I'm sorry to say this if anybody takes offence, but we are. We are a white British nation. You have policies that speak about immigration and stopping immigration and repatriating, let's say, criminals. Do you think that anyone that's in power now or that's buying for power, whether it's Reform or these other groups that are being created to splinter Reform, do you think that they are going to do that? None of those people have any intentions of doing anything like that. None of them. So we have to normalise that message. And I know that even in your own constituencies where you have ethnic minorities, they support this message. They support British people that are in this nation being housed before people that are coming in fresh off the boat, as it were. So our message is being normalised. And the take home is that no matter what they've used against us, they jeered and laughed at me 15 years ago when I said that we were going to end up being a minority in our country. We are now reading these statistics in the mainstream. This is a fact. It's going to happen. We need to have more children. We need to stop aborting our children. We need to start living as communities. All of that needs to be done. But right now, rather than all rushing home and trying to procreate, what can we do? We can come together as communities and actually, feet on the ground, start doing local work to help local people. And that's why I'm really pleased to be here today. I do think that we've got struggles ahead. I do think that we need strong men who need to put their big boy hats on, sober hats on, serious hats on. And for the Christian men that are here and that are watching this, you need to be the bedrock of this nation. Because let me tell you something, our opponents are very secure in their faith. They're very secure in their communities. We're not. We laugh and jeer at these people. Look at them, they breed like rats. They got 4 wives. Look at them all in their costumes that look nothing like our Western attire. They wear that to set themselves apart from us. They are showing us we are not you. We are not part of you. These flags going up right now are us saying, we know you're not us. We know you're not part of us. So this is our boundary and don't cross it. And ladies and gents, this might sound like a harsh message and it might be a bit difficult for people to take home, but the local politics will be keeping this country ticking whilst our boys are holding the line. And I'm not talking about holding the line, don't wear a mask. I'm talking about holding the line. They're getting petrol bombed right now for putting up flags. What do you think is coming next? That is the reality of where we're headed. And so unless you get out into your communities and start building networks and getting people behind you, it's finished anyway. You guys right here that have made the effort to travel the country, to come here, to be part of a group that is out canvassing in areas every single day, you're the men this nation belongs to. You, not the women. Doesn't belong to us ladies. It belongs to the men. The men of this nation, they fought for this nation, they bled for this nation, they died for this nation, they built this nation, and by God, please let them hold on to this nation. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for your time tonight. God bless.